Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about how to rethink e-commerce fraud prevention and stop fraudsters before they ever see the buy button. Before we dive into the slides, I just want to give a quick introduction. My name is George Lattimore. I'm your MC for today's webinar, as well as the Vertical Campaign Manager for Retail at Ping Identity. My co-host is Maya Agranovich-Scott, Retail and Fraud Solution Manager at Ping Identity. So let's take a quick look at the agenda, and then we'll get started. In today's session, we'll be discussing some of the top fraud risk in retail and e-commerce, the role of identity threats and why retailers should consider shifting left on fraud, common fraudster tactics and attack vectors, how to spot and stop fraud earlier by evaluating the entire user session, and how to reduce fraud without sacrificing the checkout experience. At the end, we'll open up for Q&A, but for now, I'll just hand it off to my co-host, Maya. Take it away.
Thanks, George. So as George mentioned, I care for both the retail and the fraud solutions here at Ping. So this combination in this topic is near and dear to my heart. I'm excited to share some insights with you and hopefully get you thinking about e-commerce fraud prevention differently by the time we finish today. So let's go ahead and get started. So you already know that e-commerce fraud is expensive. Most retailers we've found have a line item for anticipated fraud losses, and the goal is kind of just to stay under that number. Often it comes out to about 5% of revenue, but the threat landscape is always evolving and fraud threats are getting more sophisticated and hard to stop. For example, e-commerce merchants lost $38 billion to fraud in 2023, but that number is forecasted to grow every year and amount to about $362 billion between 2023 and 2028. It's a pretty huge number. The cost to resolve a single dollar of fraud in retail has also gone up. Currently, it sits at about $3.75 for each $1 of fraud. And that is also up significantly year over year. And finally, fraudsters are just straight up making more attempts. Attempted fraudulent transactions were up 92% year over year in 2023. So, of course, retailers need to constantly improve their fraud prevention practices, and it might be time to rethink when and where you detect and mitigate fraud. And I'm going to make a really bold statement here, the first of a couple. If the fraudster even gets to the buy button, your fraud prevention strategy is already failing you. And I'm going to hopefully convince you of that by the time we're done today. So the reason I say that is because focusing on checkout fraud isn't really going to get at the root of the problem. Long before a fraudster can actually check out, hit the buy button, make an order, they often must commit an identity crime first. So Ping recently did a survey of security, IT, and business decision makers globally, and over 3/4, 76%, said that they considered identity fraud as their #1 priority when it came to fraud prevention. And retailers especially should definitely start thinking this way, because dealing with identity crimes when they happen will automatically decrease the number of fraudulent transactions too. So let me explain what I mean when I say that. The transaction, the fraudulent purchase, that is the final step in a crime that usually began much, much earlier. On the screen before you, you see a typical customer journey. An unknown user browses your site. Hopefully they register for an account, maybe not. They log in using those credentials, maybe for the first, second, or third time. Maybe they might make updates to their profile, change their shipping address, add a payment method, something like that. And eventually, hopefully, they fill their cart, they don't abandon it, they go to checkout, and they make a purchase. Legacy fraud prevention focuses right here at the point of the purchase. Checkout fraud monitoring looks at whether or not the purchase seems to be legitimate, but this is a bad idea for several reasons, chief among them the fact that it means you are missing a lot of context. A lot can happen before the transaction, and in fact, we're even going to talk about several prevalent types of e-commerce fraud that don't feature a transaction, either not at all or at least not right away. By the way, focusing here also doesn't do anything good for your cart abandonment statistics. Late detection means fewer choices for mitigation and extra friction at the point of checkout, which is a key cause of cart abandonment. So let's discuss what I mean when I say a fraudster has to commit an identity crime before they can make a fraudulent purchase on your site. Here are some use cases we see often with our retail and e-commerce customers. Let's see, why is this not going? There we go. So maybe the criminal is going to take over an account in good standing. Maybe they want to use the card on file to make an order, or maybe they've already stolen payment info from some other source on the internet, and they want to take over an existing account, change out the payment info, make the order with the stolen card, and then change everything back and just disappear like a ghost. Maybe they just want access to a limited edition item only offered to your top customers, say those with a certain number of loyalty points. We've seen this use case come up. And finally, maybe they're not actually here to make a fraudulent purchase at all. They may just want to get into the account to harvest the data, including PII and payment info. Retailers do store quite a bit of data, and then they intend to use that data later in other crimes elsewhere. So in all of these cases, an account takeover has taken place, and that is an identity crime that we can catch at the point of login, so much earlier than the point of purchase. Let's shift gears a little bit. Maybe you are offering a sign-up bonus for first-time customers, or maybe a referral bonus to users who refer new customers. Maybe you are enforcing a 1 per customer restriction on a certain limited edition item. Or maybe the fraudster has realized through previous attempts that you, the retailer, tend to scrutinize new accounts or guests much more intensely. So maybe they want to let a new account age a bit before they use it to commit crimes later. In this case, a cybercriminal may decide to create a new account, or maybe many new accounts, as in the case of the referral bonus example. Let's say you get a referral for $10 for each person that you have sign up for the service, and suddenly you've made 1,000 people sign up. Wow, that's sure an exciting number of dollars that you're going to collect on those referral bonuses, and maybe even automate that attack. Talk a bit more about that later. So this is new account fraud, and this is something that can be caught at the point of registration. So again, much earlier than the point of purchase. And speaking of automation, committing fraud quickly and at scale often involves the use of bots or other automated tools. So today, as far as we know, latest data says that 47.4% of internet traffic, so that's nearly half, comes from bots. There are good bots and bad bots, which makes things even more complicated. There are some good bots that are doing good things like, for example, search engine crawlers, or maybe a chat bot that you use to interact with your customers. And then there are bad bots. These bots can be used to do all sorts of nasty things in an e-commerce setting. One example is testing stolen credit cards at checkout, maybe guest checkout, until a fraudulent transaction goes through. Maybe they want to perpetrate password cracking attacks at the point of login to get into accounts in good standing and steal their data or their money from there. Maybe bots are being used to hoard inventory and make purchases of in-demand goods in bulk for future scalping. Sniping is another issue that we see a lot, where when you have time-limited things like, say, auctions or something like that, a bot might be automated to put in a very last-minute bid, not allowing human users to respond and grabbing up all of that inventory that way. Automated attacks like these tend to cost around 4.3% of online revenues, and that is up 72% since last year. So that suggests that this number will keep going up. And there's more bad news in this space, actually. Most organizations, 88%, say that bots have negatively impacted the satisfaction of their legitimate customers. But the one bright side here is that bots and other non-human users have certain characteristics which will allow you to identify them early, at the moment that they first land on your website, long before they get to the point of checkout. So this is why I believe that retailers really need to shift left on fraud. These identity crimes tend to precede checkout fraud, and starting the fraud monitoring and response earlier is imperative for 4 key reasons. First, monitoring users throughout the entire session provides you with more context. This allows you for better detection accuracy. If you are looking at the user from the moment they land on your website, by the time they get to checkout, you have a lot of information about them, about how they're behaving, about maybe what type of device they're coming in from, about whether or not they seem human or not. A lot of information that you can use to make a much better mitigation decision. Starting fraud prevention earlier can also help prevent fraudulent activity that doesn't involve a transaction. Such as referral abuse, I was talking about earlier, bonus abuse, and data scraping. We have some customers who have loyalty programs with loyalty points that are worth real tangible money, and the theft of these loyalty points, such as, let's say, hotel points or airline miles, can actually be a very expensive crime, but no transaction technically takes place. Then the third reason would be that identifying and challenging fraudsters earlier actually means that you can shut down their schemes before they get to the buy button, right? That's the entire topic that we're talking about today. This leads to significant savings over time in fraud resolution costs, because remember, each dollar of fraud costs nearly $4 to resolve. But if you stop it before it happens, that's $4 you've saved. And then finally, the fourth reason is that getting to better detection accuracy and mitigating fraud earlier in the session will allow for less friction at the point of checkout for legitimate users. And that's going to help boost satisfaction and decrease cart abandonment, which are things that retail and e-commerce businesses always want to do. That last point is especially crucial, I think, because often there is this misconception that fraud prevention must mean a worse customer experience every time. But that doesn't actually have to be true if you approach it properly. Come on, slides. We can do this. Here we go. All right, so here is how this actually looks in practice. You have a population of users, you start fraud detection right at session initiation, and you build in that real-time mitigation, and you initiate that based on the thresholds and logic that your fraud team has set. So at the very, very beginning, you can identify bots, you can identify emulators, you can identify malicious tools, you can identify other known attack vectors. And in that case, you can feel free to kill that session. This will shut down the majority of automated large-scale attacks. This will eliminate things like password cracking. This will stop card testing at checkout, even if the user is a guest and never creates or logs into an account, because you are looking at the characteristics of the user and you are spotting the fact that the attack is automated. So it doesn't matter whether or not they logged into an account. You still know, and you just don't let them get to the point of checkout. So next, you have your population of users that are not necessarily known attack vectors, or not necessarily unknown users. At that point, you challenge the users who are exhibiting risky behaviors. You step up security and you add friction, and you should be able to do this at any point during the session. So for example, you might add additional friction at the point of registration or at the point of login, or even if the user makes some suspicious profile changes, for example, logging into an account and then changing a shipping address and turning off notifications. Kind of suspicious. Seems like that might be a theft in progress. When you deliver this challenge, it can take a lot of forms. You might require some form of MFA, or maybe even identity verification in certain use cases. In retail, we see identity verification less often, but it does actually crop up more frequently than you think. Crucially, doing all of this, so initiating that mitigation earlier in the session, means you won't be slowing down the checkout process later. So finally, your low-risk users are getting easy access. If they're low-risk users, they're exhibiting good behaviors, they should have a clear, easy path to the buy button. In fact, you might even be able to use this model to make them more likely to buy. And I'm actually going to talk about that in a moment and give you some numbers to think about. So doing it this way and sort of looking at your users continuously and splitting them out and reacting to them in real time will allow you for softer, earlier mitigation. This will provide the flexibility you and your team need to tune it to your specific thresholds. And this will hopefully fix the 16 fraud prevention steps at checkout issue, which plagues some retailers out there today. So I'm going to make a second bold claim. Doing fraud prevention right can not only limit your financial losses, it can actually improve the experience for legitimate customers. So obviously, I'm not talking about magic and fairy tales. It's true that security measures are generally a cause of friction, and friction tends to lead to customer dissatisfaction. But security measures should never be implemented in a vacuum. So this is where the strategy to focus on identity threats and shift left gets really powerful, because if you improve your fraud detection and you improve your fraud mitigation practices, it can actually help you get to less friction for most users, the good ones, the ones that you want to go and purchase something from you. And that can lead to big wins to your e-commerce business. And I'm going to actually talk about some use cases that we have seen and some successes that you too might be able to have when you shift left on fraud. Here is my first example of how fraud prevention done right can actually improve the customer experience. Let's talk about long-lasting sessions. Customers love them because logging in is annoying. It's friction by default. Maybe you have to remember a password. Maybe you've got passwordless or social login, but it's still an extra step. Did you know that 60% of customers have said that they have abandoned an account or a service forever when they had trouble logging in once? This is based on a survey of just under 10,000 consumers globally, so it's a pretty jarring number. A retailer's goal should be to fast track shoppers to their intended purchase. So you don't want them to abandon because they couldn't log in. And then not only are you losing the purchase that they might have made that day, but the long lasting customer value that you might have had, the lifetime customer value goes way down because they'll abandon and they won't come back. So long lasting sessions make it a lot easier to shop. This is always a good thing. But this actually gets better. So shoppers with long-lasting sessions are also likelier to buy. I'm going to talk about one ping customer. This is a pretty major fashion retailer. When they implemented long-lasting sessions and offered it to customers, they found that customers who had these sessions enabled were 30% more likely to make a purchase when they entered their site or their app. The financial impact of long-lasting sessions for this customer was an increase of revenue in the tens of millions of dollars over the holiday shopping season alone. And then obviously the convenience of staying signed in encourages customers to return and remain loyal. And that really adds up fast because existing customers are much more lucrative than new ones. We've all heard the statement that it's more expensive to get a new customer than to keep an existing one, but here are some numbers. Existing customers are 50% more likely to make a purchase overall, just when they enter your site. They also tend to spend 31% more on each order on average than new customers do. So based on that, why don't all retailers offer long-lasting sessions? Oftentimes because it's considered a security risk. The likelihood of account takeover goes way up in this situation, and that means the likelihood of fraudulent transaction goes way up. But with a proper counter fraud strategy in place, one that focuses on the entire user session and one that looks at your user at the point when they enter your site, you can be more confident that your customer is who they say they are. You can keep them logged in for months, a year, without actually worrying about their account being taken over or their session being hijacked. And when the urge to make that impulse purchase arrives, and you all know what I'm talking about, you can fast track them right to checkout. Be seconds between when they enter your app and when they click buy. It's a win for everybody. Let's talk about another example where fraud prevention can help customer experience get better. And let's talk about guest checkout and some guest checkout best practices. So being forced to create an account at checkout is a leading cause of cart abandonment. It's only second to unexpected costs like fees and shipping. And about 26% of consumers say that they have abandoned a purchase for this reason. So offering guest checkout decreases cart abandonment and it satisfies those customers who aren't yet sure that they want to commit to you. It's a big win-win. And by the way, you don't have to give up your customer acquisition goals either. Here's another example. We've found with some of our e-commerce customers that we can build a customer journey that offers easy and convenient guest checkout, and then use progressive profiling to encourage the customer to sign up after they've already made a purchase. So you've already collected their name, their email address for the confirmation, and their shipping address to ship them the goods. Then you add something like a pop-up saying, thanks for your purchase. Here's a 10% coupon off your next order. If you want to sign up, just click this button. Your account is already created, especially if you do this with a passwordless sign up so that they don't actually have to create and remember a password. There's a lot of good luck in acquiring customers after they've already made the initial purchase. And honestly, even if the customer says no to the offer of account creation after checkout, you still won because they've already spent their money with you. They've already made a purchase. And if that experience was easy and enjoyable, they might even come back again, maybe still as a guest and shop more in the future. Maybe you can convince them to sign up next time. So based on how well guest checkout can perform, why is it that 47% of e-commerce retailers either don't offer guest checkout at all, or they hide it so well that it may as well not exist? Part of this is surely due to customer acquisition targets, but again, there's a better way to care for those while letting shoppers check out as guests if they want to. That is a conversation for another time, so I definitely encourage you to join some of our retail webinars later this year so we can talk about it, because I'm really passionate about this topic. But to get back to the topic of fraud specifically, a major reason that so many retailers don't like guest checkout is simply the fact that this is where so many fraudulent transactions happens. Fraudsters love guest checkout. They like it as a place to test and use stolen payment information. Fortunately, a good fraud prevention strategy can actually stop these threats while still offering easy and convenient checkout for your legitimate guest users. One key way that this works is by looking for bots and other non-human users, because it is incredibly common for fraudsters to automate card testing and other similar crimes. And if you can identify those non-human users, that means you can stop the crime without sacrificing guest checkout convenience for actual customers. You can also look at other factors, not just looking for bots, but looking at things like device and IP reputation, or maybe the number of requests sent from a given IP, or several other types of things to identify those guest transactions that might potentially be risky. So I'm going to summarize. Retailers stand to gain a lot by taking a new approach to fraud. Instead of focusing on the transaction, you want to look for the root of the problem, the identity crime that preceded the purchase. Focusing on account takeover, new account fraud, and non-human users will let you identify fraudsters earlier in the session. If you stop them at registration, or at login, or at profile management, they never even have to see the buy button. That means that checkout itself can be a smooth, frictionless, and delightful process for your real customers. With the pressure off of transaction monitoring as the single line of defense against fraud, you can make it easier and more enjoyable to check out. And all of this can actually lead to better customer experiences. You don't have to compromise on customer experience and fraud prevention. You can and you should have both. With things like secure guest checkout or long-lasting sessions, as well as smoother experiences overall, your customers will be delighted and they will never feel the friction of fraud prevention. So here at Ping, we have seen our retail and e-commerce customers have great success when they focus on identity fraud prevention. If you are hoping to reimagine your approach to e-commerce fraud, I invite you to reach out to us to see what we can do and how we can help with our full suite of fraud detection, identity verification, access management, and orchestration tools. We know that we can help you build a better fraud response that will help you decrease losses and satisfy your customers. How to do, George?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Maya. Thanks for taking us through that. There's plenty to think about there from what you discussed today. And it does look like we have some time left for some questions, so maybe we can answer a few. Here's the first one. Are you suggesting we stop looking at transaction fraud and monitoring transactions? Because this seems like a really dangerous approach potentially.
Yeah, that does seem like a really dangerous approach. That's definitely not what I'm suggesting. You should still absolutely monitor transactions for payment fraud, right? Payment fraud is still an issue. It's still a risk that you face. It is a prevalent problem in e-commerce. What I'm trying to say instead is that the point of the transaction should not be your sole line of defense. It should be your very last line of defense if every other defense that you put in place has failed you. If a user has passed every other check and everything else seems fine, but the transaction still looks risky, you can and should still challenge them. But the goal in focusing earlier in the session and that shift left principle that I'm talking about is to make it so that fewer criminals actually get through to the point of checkout. This decreases the number of attempted fraudulent transactions, and this layered approach of looking at multiple things can only do good things for your detection accuracy, because the last thing that you want to do, right, is to have a legitimate customer accidentally flagged as a fraudster. Hopefully that makes sense. Do both. You should do both.
Okay, yeah. So we should do both, right? So it's possible to combine existing fraud tools and sources of data with these identity fraud detection tools that you're talking about. Is that essentially right?
Yes, absolutely. So this goes back to what I said about fraud detection and prevention not existing in a vacuum. Fraud prevention in general is an additive business, right? So the average organization, last time we surveyed, uses about 5 fraud tools today. If you can bring all of those tools together instead of having each of them function separately, and you can integrate them into your user journey, and ideally you can use context from every data source to make better fraud mitigation decisions, that is really going to improve your security posture. So instead of fraud tools that you already have, your payment fraud tools, maybe other identity or other related fraud tools that you might already have in place, instead of having each one of them function on their own and then just sort of plugging them in at the moment of checkout or at random moments throughout the session, taking a more holistic approach and putting all of those into the user journey and really building and baking it in. And then also taking information from tools A, B, and C and feeding them into some sort of centralized decisioning tool that's going to say, well, I see some issues from, A and C, and B thinks this session is fine, but the risk threshold is pretty high based on the combined risks coming out of A and C. So I think I'm going to challenge this user. That's where this can get really, really powerful. And you can get really good at spotting all of the criminals without annoying the real users.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Here's another one. How long should a long-lasting session actually last?
Well, that is going to depend. It's going to depend on your individual business, on your risk tolerance, on kind of how comfortable you are going live with this. But so the customer I mentioned who saw a 30% improvement in purchase likelihood, they enabled long-lasting sessions that lasted 1 year and 1 day. So just over a year. And there is something tactical about this too. I think ideally during peak shopping seasons is exactly when you want to not ask customers to log in. So if you can arrange your long-lasting sessions to ensure that maybe when you launch it, the time that expires isn't going to be at a time when a lot of people are coming in to buy. That is the time of year that you're trying to make your numbers. You're probably going to be in a good place.
Okay, great advice. Let's see, one more here. So everyone's talking about AI, especially when it comes to fraud. What are your thoughts on it, in the context of the conversation today and some of the things you walked us through?
Sure. This is kind of a tough one, right? Everyone's definitely talking about AI when it comes to cybersecurity overall. I think there are 2 things that I would say about it here. The first one is the thing that everyone's worried about. AI is going to enable fraudsters to commit more crimes more effectively. They're going to get better at stealing personal data. They're going to get much better at account takeover. They're going to get better at making synthetic identities. They're going to get better at automating attacks. And the access to the ability to do these things is also going to improve. But on the flip side of that, AI also is going to be instrumental to stopping them, right? AI and ML tools need to be built into fraud prevention tools, especially as we go into this brave new world where we still don't know everything that AI can or will do. AI and ML are the key to better fraud prevention. Your fraud tools should hopefully be able to learn the behavior and characteristics of your customers over time. So that would actually help you more effectively identify account takeover and other identity threats. And tools that can do this and that do the learning, they get better and more accurate the longer you use them. So you're going to actually continually see better results when you're using a tool that learns this way. Hopefully that is helpful. There's a lot to say about AI, and there's still a lot of things that we don't know, but I would say it's going to be used as an attack vector, so you'd better use it as part of your prevention strategy.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Maya. That's great advice. And thank you for your time today. To everyone in the audience, thank you for your time and spending this webinar time with us. Please don't hesitate to reach out and connect with us if you have any additional questions. If you want to talk through some of what we've covered today, and how it might apply to your real world challenges your enterprise or your organization is facing, please reach out and let us know, and have a great day. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.